Reserve. The root of all our evil, it begins with the Federal Reserve. Hey, yeah, well, let's go back in time when everybody was so proud of America.
I'm Tommy Salmons. This is Year Zero. Today, Adam Fitzgerald joins me. If you don't know who Adam Fitzgerald is, you have not looked into 9/11 enough. Adam Fitzgerald is one of the best researchers on the subject of 9/11. He's not one of these kook, no plane guys or any of this shit. He just comes at you with the facts that can be proven. So much so that retired lieutenant colonels have been on his podcast, The Darkened Hour, to talk about this stuff. So you're going to enjoy this. Now, this is part one of, I don't know how many parts. We actually lost reception towards the end. So we had to cut it off in 1993. Yes, during the conversation about 9/11 2001, we had to cover 1979 to 1993. That's how good Adam is. And so you'll really, really dig this. And it's pretty topical for the week after the 21st anniversary of 9/11. So dig in, man. You're going to enjoy it. And guess what? We're recording the rest of it tonight. So it'll be coming soon. I promise, my friends. Enjoy the show. RyanBunting.com for all of your graphic design needs. Go to RyanBunting.com. Ryan Bunting is a great libertarian and a great anarcho-capitalist. He's also a really great friend of mine. And that's why I talk so much shit on RyanBunting.com. Like calling him a racist or a little girl or a whiny bitch or a faggot or whatever else I might call Ryan Bunting. It's all out of love because RyanBunting.com is where I go for all of my graphic design needs. And that's where you should go too. LibertarianInstitute.org is where you will find my podcast, Patrick McFarlane with Liberty Weekly, Scott Horton's show, Keith Knight, Don't Tread on Anyone, Kyle Anzalone, Conflicts of Interest, and a bunch of great writers like Will Porter, Jim Bovard, Kim Davidson. Like, they're all there. LibertarianInstitute.org. Go check out the LibertarianInstitute.org. You might even run into Sheldon Richardson. Okay, I can't talk now. Sheldon Richmond, if you check it out on a Friday. So go to LibertarianInstitute.org. I don't know why. I just got so tongue twisted. That was hilarious. I don't know. I'm going to leave it in because I'm fucking human, just like the rest of you motherfuckers. All right. Thank you, Tom Burton, for the music. Let's go, motherfuckers. Okay. I'm here with Mr. Adam Fitzgerald. How are you doing, sir?
Hey, good evening, Tommy. What's up, man?
Not much, man. Not much. We are creeping up on the 21st anniversary of 9/11. By the time I release this for people that don't pay me, I'll give it to people that pay me first. But by the time I release it for people that don't pay me, it will be after 9/11 because 9/11 is the day after tomorrow because we're recording on Friday. So, okay. So we've had a conversation about 9/11 before, but I wanted to kind of back up just a little bit. And I want to kind of set the foundation of what was occurring, what happened, where 9/11 come from. So can you give us a little bit of a background on the CIA and the Mujahideen? Because I think that's the best place to start. Like, it might go further back, but I think that's the best place to start.
I think that would be the best place to start because it's not too far in the past, but and a little bit recent. And a lot of the players of the final part of the 20th century were involved with the events of September 11, 2001, and in foreign policy guidelines that predicated before it were completed after it. CIA operation that you're referring to is Operation Cyclone, which was one of the most successful CIA operations in history. Hundreds of millions of dollars were funneled through the Pakistan ISI, the intelligence services, because the one thing the Afghans didn't want was non-governmental organizations or NGOs involved with the war, because they feared that the war would turn into an American war. And so that in other words, they'll be glad to take your money and funding and weapons, but they didn't want to see you in the battlefield. So the program was authorized under the Reagan administration, which funneled all the money and weapons through the Pakistan ISI to the Afghan Mujahideen. A little bit went to the Arabs. Something that needs to be said, because it often gets confused, is that you have two factions or two different cultures involved with this war, and that's Afghans and Arabs. The Afghans are notable warriors. They're actually hardened individuals, as opposed to Arabs, who are not experienced in times of mainline warfare.
When you, I'm sorry, I just want to clarify.
Sure.
When you're saying Afghan, are you speaking like mainly Pashtun?
Yeah, Pashtuns.
Okay. Okay.
Pashtuns.
I just want to, what, because there are more people in Afghanistan than just a Pashtun, right?
Right, Hazaras,
There you go.
Tajiks. So yeah, there's a lot of cultures involved, in small little tribes involved with Afghanistan. It's a simple country, but very complex intricacies involved with the country itself. And this often comes with tribal warfare. It's over even the most trivial of matters. And this actually played a part in the war as well. But when the Arabs started coming in, and they started coming in because you had notable imams such as Abdul Yusuf Azam, who was a notable Palestinian imam teaching at the University of King Fahd in Saudi Arabia, who came from the schools in Jordan and Egypt, and basically was calling for a worldwide jihad when the Soviets invaded Kabul, the capital of Afghanistan. In doing so, you had an influx of hundreds of thousands of Arabs coming into a country from all different places of the world. And so they didn't know what to do at the time. So during this time, Abdul Azam, along with an Algerian dissident, Abdullah Anas, created a building called the Maktab al-Khidmat. And from the Arabic, it means the Afghan Services Bureau. And what this bureau was, what the idea Azam had, was to build a building that housed and trained and processed all these Arabs that were coming into, training them and learning them about religion and spiritual, because Azam saw this as a spiritual battle against a secular invader. And this brought a lot of attention because Azam was a very powerful speaker and very influential and was very respected throughout the Arab world. And this was seen as he was seen as a very valuable asset to the Arab world. And one such person that actually caught his attention was a student of his while he was attending the university in Saudi Arabia, and his name was Osama bin Laden. And bin Laden actually was a very gregarious individual, very quiet individual as well. He was religious, but not a fanatic at that point. There was a certain event that basically did change his thinking so much, and that was the mosque seizure in 1979 by Juliman al-Khattabi, who considered himself the next Mahdi or the redeemer of Islam, and they basically challenged the kingdom, something that's never been seen before. And bin Laden, who's the 53rd child of Mohammed Awad bin Laden, the magnate of the most powerful construction company in Riyadh, the Saudi bin Laden Group, which was in the process of rebuilding Mecca, Medina, holiest sites of Islam. And so he was getting, a large share of money, and he didn't have to do what he did. But basically what he was doing was that he was trying to find some direction in his life. And he actually used his father's construction company to start building ditches and roads for the Afghan Mujahideen. And because he was doing this, the Afghans who didn't like Arabs, and bin Laden's an Arab, Yemeni, saw him as a pariah of sorts. And like, wow, this guy could, he's a multi-millionaire. He didn't have to do this. And so they really went out of their way and respected him. And he was awarded a lot of benefits in doing so. And so while he was doing this, he was given a permission to build the first Arab training camp in Afghanistan, which is unprecedented because they didn't like Arabs. They only used them because the saying in Afghanistan was the good thing about Arabs is they know how to die. And
what year was this happening?
1979, 1980.
Okay, was Bush Sr. still the head of the CIA at this time?
He was director of CIA.
So he was directly involved with this, so that when in the 80s, when he was vice president, he already had kind of feelers for what was going on over there.
Yes, he was.
Okay.
The issue of the CIA's operation was that they feared that the Soviets would basically take over the country and extend it to Pakistan and basically control the Caspian Sea, which is north of Iran. Pakistan, actually, the reason why they got involved was because they thought they were next and that they didn't have the capabilities to thwart the Soviet influence. But thing was, Soviet Union was not going to extend past Afghanistan. But, Pakistan didn't know that. So they took the necessary measures of training the Afghans, basically allowing them to become instituted with training camps there, especially along the border of Afghanistan and Pakistan. Places like Paktia province, the Panjshir Valley, Baluchistan, which is basically an inroad into Pakistan, Afghanistan, the Silk Road where the drugs were coming in, weapons, and a lot of these very nefarious old tribes that were basically, some of them were big-time drug dealers because you have the Helmand province, which is the home to the largest acreage of poppy fields on earth, even more so than the Golden Triangle, which is the second most second most in terms of producing heroin. And this became, the most powerful people in Afghanistan, Pakistan were drug traders, drug dealers. And the Mujahideen knew this. And they basically didn't like drugs. In fact, a lot of these Afghan warlords abhorred it since a lot of them were religious. They come from Hanafi, they're called the Hanafi school, which is a Sunni subset of Islam, and they're very traditionalist. So they didn't like drugs, but they knew that the money, this is where big money comes from, and that they could help get more weapons and stuff like this. So they allowed some of these people to, they started commiserating with a lot of these drug dealers.
It sounds like a prerequisite or early interpretation of the Taliban is what I'm hearing.
Yeah, very much so. Yeah. But afterwards, the director of the CIA became Stansfield Turner, and this is where Operation Cyclone became much more instituted in the war. Okay. And it was a portion of the operation where Reagan allowed for a contract to be made regarding the because one thing about the Soviets when they were getting the upper hand was aerial power. What they would do is they would go to like these mountainous regions in Afghanistan and carpet bomb the mountains where the anti-tank artillery and anti-aerial shells artillery was instituted. And a lot of these Afghans basically created these makeshift mountains and tried to hide in the daytime. And at night, the Soviets would use these, I think MH-130s they're called. I could be wrong about that. And they would basically use tracers. And, it actually turned the tide of the war in the Soviets' favor. The United States saw this. And Reagan basically said that we're going to make a contract with the Afghans the northern and southern alliances and basically give them Stinger missiles to try and help them fight down these fighter jets and helicopters that would basically come in after these fighter jets and, use machine guns and try to clean up as much as they could. Because of this, it actually turned the tide of the war because of the Stinger missile issue. And a lot of these Stinger missiles not only went to the Afghans, but more troubling is they went to the Arabs. And the Arabs are much more troubling regarding Afghans. So a lot of these Arabs that got these Stinger missiles later on used those Stinger missiles in the Somalia region and basically made a film about it called Black Hawk Down. And that those same weapons actually were in the hands of some of these very troubling Arab fundamentalist sects that were basically using them against the same country that gave them to them. But that will come much later if we want to get into it. Operation Cyclone was a huge success because all that money and all that training and all the weapons that made this turn to the tide of the war successful was because of the CIA, the Pakistan ISI, the British MI6, Israeli Mossad, and every other intelligence apparatus, the Saudi Arabia General Intelligence Directorate, the GID. All of this was a huge, enormous success because the Soviets in 1989 basically mediated with the one country that helped facilitate the war, and they didn't realize it, was Pakistan. Pakistan mediated a peaceful surrender and retreat out of the country. So here's where the United States made a huge mistake, in other words, and for me personally, was that when the Soviets left, the communist influences in Afghanistan stood behind and basically tried to fight off the Mujahideen factions. People like Abdul Rasul Sayyaf, Gulbuddin Hekmatyar, who basically were the biggest warlords at the time, but they were brutal. And they were, even brutal to the Afghan Pashtuns, the farmers themselves. And basically, Gulbuddin Hekmatyar, basically an example would be if women weren't wearing the full niqab, was the face covering, he would throw acid in their faces. So this is a brutal man. But, the CIA only deals with brutal people. So they were more than willing to give him funding in the military. And since he had the biggest Afghan army, which is the Hizb-e-Islami army, he got a majority of the biggest portions of the funding from the CIA, from the British MI6 and the ISI in general. And his faction grew so big. They basically was a political power later on and basically created this large faction in Afghanistan, which later on was involved with a civil war with the Northern Alliance because he was no friend to the leader of the Northern Alliance, Ahmed Shah Massoud, who were fighting for control of the country at the same time. Now, at the same time, while this is happening, Soviets are leaving. The Pakistan, later on, we find out the Pakistan ISI helped to create an entity, an agency that would subvert not just the Soviets, but more importantly, the Indians for the control of Kashmir. And they were a religious institution called the Taliban. And what they were was just a small little bunch of people coming out of these madrasas in Islamabad and I'm forgetting a major city, Islamabad, and forgive me here.
None of us can remember everything, man.
Yes. You know what it is, too? Because I'm older, I can actually say this is the first forms of dementia.
It's like like Scott always says, I have whatever Biden has.
Yeah. Yes. I'll use that as an excuse. Sorry, Scott, I'm stealing that one. I'm sorry, Abbottabad. Okay. So a lot of these religious fundamentalists were coming out of these schools and coming in droves because one thing about the Afghans was that they were dying in droves in the war, and replacing them was these mullahs that were coming out of these madrasas. And so the Taliban was created through Pakistan ISI funding to subvert not just the Indians, but also the Soviet influence and the communist influence that was of whatever that was left in the the capital of Kabul, Afghanistan, which is Kabul. And so the Taliban made an agreement with people like Gulbuddin Ekbatar, saying that, hey, listen, we'll work with you to subvert, this Northern Alliance, and so we could take over the country together. And so the Civil War turned out to be even more deadlier than the 10-year war of the Soviets, and killed hundreds of thousands of even the locals. A lot of these people suffered under the Taliban's brutal interpretation of the Hanafi school of thought. And basically, the women need to cover up. They couldn't basically go to universities. And Masood basically was, not a clean hands guy. He worked with these mullahs and drug dealers as well. But he was a better option as opposed to what was coming. The United States did not help. Even Masood pleaded with the Reagan administration and later on the Clinton administration, saying that, hey, listen, if you don't help me, these guys are basically going to take control of the country, and you're the ones going to be in trouble. Because guess what? All those Arabs that were left behind basically either went back to their countries of origin, places like Indonesia, Philippines, North Africa, even the United States and Britain. Well, what did they do with that training and funding that the CIA, the British MI6, Israeli Mossad, and Saudi GID gave them? Well, they created the following: Al-Qaeda, Boko Haram, which is situated in North Africa, Jam Islamiyah, that's Indonesia, Abu Sayyaf, which is in the Philippines. And what did they do? Well, they helped to create some of the biggest terrorist operations on the face of the earth. All because of not just what the CIA gave them, Pakistan ISI gave them, but also because of our brutal foreign policy. And that is the most hidden secret of all of this, is that the United States at the same time is allies with some of the most questionable governments on the face of the earth. And we're talking about Saudi Arabia, the Gulf, that's United Arab Emirates, Qatar, and Bahrain, and Israel. And so because we're allied with these repressive governments, the Arabs basically saw this as an affront, as a war against the Muslim nation, the Islamic Ummah, which is the Islamic nation itself.
Well,
and so they created their own wars with these secular Arab governments at home, and basically went to war with U.S. interests.
I just wanted to add on. You were talking about Boko Haram in northern Africa. You know that they've spread, right? So my wife is from South Africa. So Boko Haram and her dad is from Namibia, which is a Western African country that borders South Africa on the West Coast. And Boko Haram has been active in both South Africa and Namibia. So it is almost like all over the continent of Africa now.
Yes.
And so, all right. So I'm when I'm listening to what you're drawing out, and I don't know if anybody else is catching this, but we're going to put all these pieces together for everyone, just so they understand. Kissinger, I believe it was Kissinger, said that they were going to create a new Vietnam for the Russians, and that Afghanistan was it Kissinger that made this statement? Am I right on this? He was
Zbigniew Brzezinski, the national.
Oh, was it Brzezinski? Even worse than Kissinger.
You know what? If it's a battle, that's probably Kissinger by a hair.
You think? Okay, I'll give it to you. I've read Brzezinski's books. I've never read anything by Kissinger. I'm much more afraid of Brzezinski.
Well, in recent times, Brzezinski.
Okay, so he said that the goal was to deliver a new Vietnam to the Russians. They were utilizing Afghanistan, and because it's the country that defeats empires, right? Like that's the empire killer. The destabilization that the U.S. had ushered in to Afghanistan directly led to the 1993 bombing.
Now, was this before or after there was bases set up in Saudi Arabia by the U.S.?
Before. This is after. Now, to put it into context, if I could.
Yes, please do. I know I'm giving like a very short tale here.
No, and what I don't want to do is like lose your listener with any complexities. So I'll try to make it as simple as possible if I could. And what I'm trying to do is put it in a timeline of sorts. The Arab camp that I spoke about before, that bin Laden was allowed to grow, allowed to construct, is absolutely important. So I'm going to take it from there and put it into context of what led from there. So in 1988, bin Laden was allowed to grow a camp called Al-Masada. And from the Arabic, it's called the Lion's Den. And this Arab camp was basically training Arabs in small arms fire, guerrilla warfare, to train other Afghans in close quarters combat. He was given permission by an Afghan warlord that I mentioned before, Abdul Rasul Sayyaf, because Abdul Rasul Sayyaf and another Afghan warlord named Jalaluddin Haqqani, who later on created the Haqqani network, which still in his existence today, were the only Afghans that allowed Arabs to come into their ranks and fight against the Soviets. Other Afghans wouldn't do that. They didn't want Arabs with them. But these guys actually did. And so Sayyaf told bin Laden, yes, you could build a training camp here. So when they were training this camp, allowed the founding members of this camp went with bin Laden to the Sudan. Now, after the war, bin Laden went back to Saudi Arabia as a hero because of what he achieved in Afghanistan. And so when Iraq invaded Kuwait in 1991, the Saudi Arabian government and the kingdom basically worried that they were next. Similar to what Pakistan was thinking with the Soviets' invasion of Afghanistan. So they held a meeting of the highest principles regarding the kingdom. Bin Laden actually wanted to speak with King Fahd at the time and said that he has a plan for him to repel the Ba'athist army, and basically said that he would use the Mujahideen, the Arab Mujahideen, to repel against the Ba'athist military. King Fahd was aghast at this, said, no, we need a real military, so to speak. We don't know what was said, but, similar to this, and basically rejected bin Laden. And because he rejected bin Laden, he respected and feared enough that, he would cause attacks inside the kingdom. So they put him under house arrest and they froze his accounts and they froze his passport. Now, there is a book by Peter Lance called 1,000 Years for Revenge, and a book called I Knew Bin Laden, where basically, and also Lawrence Wright, who wrote the book The Looming Tower, and they basically said that there was a backdoor deal between the Saudi Arabian head of the director of the General Intelligence Directorate and bin Laden, and the person, his name is Prince Turki bin Faisal, who basically told bin Laden in no certain words, said that there's an ultimatum. You could take it or reject it. The ultimatum is this: we will unfreeze your accounts, give you back your passport, but you have to leave the country. Bin Laden thought about it and basically said, okay, I'll do that. And he sent 2 scouts to the Sudan and to feel out, whether he'd be welcome there. And the president of the Sudan is Omar al-Bashir, and there's another religious influential figure named Hassan al-Turabi, the leader of the National Islamic Front. And why he sent 2 emissaries there was because Sudan is the only country on the face of the earth that doesn't require a guest to have a passport. And so because of this, bin Laden basically was welcomed to the country. Another reason why they welcomed him into the country, knowing his background, was because here's a guy who has hundreds of millions of dollars at his disposal. So we could use that in this very poor country, because the Sudan in 1992 was poverty stricken. Most of the country was not getting any state funding because of corruption and whatnot. And there's a lot of warlords there fighting against the locals for control of the small areas. So they were going under very turbulent times as well. Bin Laden is welcome, open arms. I mean, this video of him getting the full promenade and flowers and whatever thrown at him. He's treated like a leader in the country. And throughout time, he spends millions of dollars, tens of millions, building roads and infrastructure. But at the same time, he invites all the members of the al-Masada camp there, as well as Egyptian influence there. Now, when I talk about Egyptian influence, this is very big, because members of a very radical sect of Egypt called the Egyptian Islamic Jihad are, which is basically, they were involved with the assassination of the President Anwar Sadat in 1980. And a lot of those people were imprisoned. One such individual, his name is Dr. Ayman al-Zawahiri. And he's going to make a very big, influential impact later on.
He's my next note.
Yes, he is. He should be. Well, basically, he's actually released because he has no direct involvement with the assassination. And a lot of those individuals that were involved with groups like Gamma Islamiyah and the Egyptian Islamic Jihad, the ones that aren't directly involved with the assassination of Sadat are released, but they are released out of the country. So a lot of them go to Afghanistan, and basically the Egyptian state security investigation services basically just allow them to go to Afghanistan, hoping that they would die and never return back to their home country. Well, a lot of them did, but some of them actually lived. And Ayman al-Zawahiri met bin Laden in Peshawar, Pakistan, and basically became friends with him there. And a lot of these Egyptians brought their hardline thinking, their ideology of the Egyptian Islamic Jihad along with them. And this helped shape bin Laden's mentality, because al-Masada was basically not a terrorist group, not a fundamentalist group. They were there to repel the communist influence in Afghanistan. When bin Laden was relocated to the Sudan, he invited all the members of the al-Masada camp, as well as the Egyptians, along with him. And they helped to create a big group. And this group basically would be renamed Al-Qaeda. Taken from the Arabic, it's called the base. Now, in time, I hear about the conspiracies. Oh, it's a base. It's a database. It's not really a group. And it's just a bunch of Mujahideen fighters in this database. They get money from the American government. No, it's not. It's actually a real group. They are coming from the base. The base is al-Masada. It was a training base for Arabs.
Right.
And I'm not making this up. You could look it up. Look up al-Masada training camp, and you'll notice that a lot of the founding members of that training camp were the founding members of Al-Qaeda. And some of those names are Abu Haraj al-Iraqi, Mahmoud Salim, Jamal al-Fadl, Dr. Imam al-Sharif, Dr. Ayman al-Zawahiri, and other, Abu Haraj al-Iraqi, Abu Hafs al-Masri. Later on, he would be renamed to Muhammad Atef, Abu Ubaidah al-Banshiri. I can name others, but you get the gist. There's a lot of these Egyptians and Arabs that were involved with this training camp, then involved with the formation of Al-Qaeda. Now, if you'll remember the Maktab al-Kidmat, there was a number of buildings that were made. There was a couple of buildings that were made. And so al-Masada fashioned itself after that. When Azam was killed, I totally forgot about this part. When Azam was assassinated and nobody found out who killed him, he was instrumental in building the Maktab al-Kidmat. But because Dr. Ayman al-Zawahiri basically created these false rumors about him, he basically was pushed out of control of the Maktab al-Kidmat, and bin Laden took it over, but dissolved it afterwards. And a lot of that ideas of the Maktab al-Kidmat went to Al-Qaeda as well. So Al-Qaeda created a religious committee, a military committee, and a media committee in the same fashion of the Maktab al-Kidmat. But instead of fighting the Soviets, now that they would be concentrating on fighting somebody, but they didn't know who. and they didn't have a political like mindset. They didn't have a real ideology, even when they were building their group in the Sudan. And one book in particular, which I consider invaluable about the early formations of Al Qaeda, is called Al Qaeda in Afghanistan, which was written by Ann Stevenson. And it's a very short book. It's a hard book to get, but if you can get it, please read it. And you probably could download it in PDF form for free, but support the author because what she put in was some of the most invaluable information about the early days of Al Qaeda and how they were formed. And you'll notice that when they were formed, they weren't a terrorist organization at first. They later became that, but at first they didn't have this, what the State Department narrative is that Al Qaeda was always, this infamous, terrorist group. Well, they weren't like that at all. And what helped facilitate their ideology was this implementation of the Egyptian Islamic Jihad and American foreign policy. In other words, they gave them a reason to act that way. And, I also want to say at the same time, what Al Qaeda did is criminal. I mean, they're a reprobate, organization. But at the same time, you have to understand and empathize with your enemy to understand why they're doing it. And one thing about Al Qaeda, when they conducted these attacks like 9/11 or the East Africa bombings, is that why they did it. And what the State Department narrative is that, they did it because they hate our freedoms. No, that's not the case. It has nothing to do with religion whatsoever. Everything to do with foreign policy. Because if we concentrate on what's wrong with our foreign policy, why they're acting this way, we might rectify it. Well, that would involve Israel and Saudi Arabia.
Yeah.
Because that's what it's all about. But you talk about 1993. So what happened was, and this is a complicated issue because Al Qaeda was not involved with 93. Now, there's certain arguments about, Ramzi Youssef and Al Qaeda. Well, Ramzi Youssef never swore loyalty to bin Laden, bayat, which means loyalty. He was never involved with Al Qaeda. He's a part of a very, very fraternal organization called the Baluchi clan. Even though he was born in Kuwait, allegedly, we really don't know because there's such few records about Ramzi Youssef, whose real name is Abdul Basit Karim, but he goes by many other different nom de gours. His uncle is another individual you probably heard, Khalid Sheikh Mohammed, also raised in Baluchistan. They come from a very, very insular family, educated family as well, but Baluchistan is a very turbulent, very dangerous area. Like I said, a lot of drug dealings, a lot of the Silk Road is connected to that. Very, very particular clan itself, and a lot of mystery behind it. There's so much mystery involving Khalid Sheikh Mohammed and Ramzi Youssef, and we really won't know much about their younger days, so I'm not going to really, opine my thoughts about it. So a lot of the Egyptians and Afghans...
Is this... All right, so let's just touch on this for just 1 second.
Sure.
So this little clan that carried out the attempted bombing in 1993, well, it was successful. It just didn't accomplish its goals, basically. You said Baluchi clan?
Yeah, Baluchi clan. Yeah.
Okay. So would this be like a Sicilian mafia kind of like organization? Like, you know what I'm saying? Like, it's like this criminal organization that's based out of this specific area that does their thing. And maybe Al Qaeda was getting influence from them, but they weren't directly involved.
It's, if I could put it like, if I use your analogy of like being like the Camorra in Italy, no. They're like a subset. So in other words, they didn't have an organization, in other words. Like Youssef and Khalid Sheikh Mohammed weren't structured like Al Qaeda. Okay? They were more like independent contractors.
Okay.
If I could use that term.
Gotcha.
But they were very influential. it's alleged that Khalid Sheikh Mohammed and his brother Zahir had connections with the Pakistan ISI.
Right.
Same
It wasn't,
thing with
and
Ramzi Youssef.
every time you look into 9/11, Khalid Sheikh Mohammed's name pops up
Yes.
thousands of times. I mean, it's everywhere.
Yes.
And so that's why I'm like, all right, I've always tied the 1993 bombing to 9/11 because that name is everywhere.
Yes, because there's a direct link, and it's a huge link, not just with them, but also with how the intelligence apparatuses, foreign and domestic, were involved as well as like a institution of having maybe a mole involved with the operations itself. And I could talk about that in a minute, but to try to make a timeline of sorts here. Now, with the Afghans, a lot of these people went back home. So a lot of these Afghans went to New York, and a lot of these people that were involved with the 1993 World Trade Center bombing has links of being involved with the Afghan war and training through Operation Cyclone, the CIA, and the Pakistan ISI as well. And with the 1993 World Trade Center bombing, a lot of the individuals that were involved, like Mahmoud Abalima, Mohammed Salameh, Nadal Ayad, Ali Muhammad.
We have company. Can you give me 1 second?
Yeah, sure.
My dog figured out how to open the door. You want to say hi? Bug, come say hi.
Hey, pal. Oh, I like that. I'm a sucker for animals.
Oh, here's the other one.
Oh, there we go. Hey.
All right, now.
Hey.
Let me get them out of the room real quick. I'm sorry.
Yeah, sure.
Come on.
They want to play.
Okay. Yeah, your dog busted the door open. Tonight there's got to be a jailbreak. It wasn't my dog, it was your dog.
I'm a sucker for animals, so
they're monsters, but they're babies at the same time. So
thank goodness for them. They keep your sanity.
Yes. Yeah. It's funny. It's funny watching, like, the first one that jumped on me. He rode with me when I was over the road. And so he rode with me from the time he was 5 weeks old till he's 2 years old.
Oh,
and
my God.
And he's hilarious because he follows my ducks around the yard. Because, yeah, the first time he always kind of wanted to go after the chickens when he was younger.
Right.
But we went out to the pond because I have a pond out back. And we went out to the pond one time and he was swimming in the pond and the ducks were swimming from him. And he was like, wait, what are these things? Right. And ever since then, he feels like he has a bond with these ducks.
There is a bond, like they're animal kingdom. So
yeah, exactly. So yeah, that's my dude. He will beat the shit out of me, like, on any given moment. Like, I get down on the floor and wrestle with him and I'll be like, oh God, I got to remember I'm not 20 years old anymore. Right. My body cannot deal with this.
That's great.
Yeah. You know, he's like 100 pounds. I mean, he's a monster.
Oh my God. Wow. Fuck. Holy cow. All right.
But anyway, like, can we get back on track? I don't even remember where you were at.
No. Yeah. Ali Muhammad, who's an Egyptian military officer, is someone who's known to the Egyptian Islamic Jihad and Gamma Islamiyah, who I mentioned previously, comes to the United States and basically offers his services to the FBI, CIA as an informant at the same time. So he's like a triple agent. And he basically goes to this mosque in Brooklyn called Al Farouk, who at the same time had an office on top called the Al-Kifa Refugee Center, which was an extension of the Maktab al-Khidmah I was talking about before. Right. And they were getting funding and direct training, which was at the same time being watched by the FBI at the same time. So they knew what was going on there, but they allowed it, to transpire anyway. And Ali Muhammad actually became involved with the members of this group and started giving them small arms training, like what was going on in Afghanistan.
Mm.
And at times, Ali Muhammad would actually, while he was in the United States, he was also a member of the U.S. Army, and basically was training at Fort Bragg in North Carolina. And he would actually tell his trainer there, his superiors, that he would leave and enter another war. And they said, well, you can't do that. You can't fight for a foreign army. And he was given permission to do so. Later on, those same military officers were basically like, well, who the hell is this guy? He could just do that. And they figured out that, the CIA actually was giving him the reason to do that. So Ali Muhammad would basically come back and
I stood on the same ground, man. I was at Fort Bragg.
Oh, really? So you were in the same areas as 1983?
We went to the same PX.
You. And basically, he was giving small arms training, and the FBI was basically, taking photographs of them training in small arms fire in a Long Island gun range called Calverton. And there's one infamous photo of Muhammad Salameh, Ali Muhammad, Mahmoud Abalima, is a tall, redheaded Egyptian who's, really a tall guy. He's really out there. And, these photographs are shared widely with the FBI Joint Terrorism Task Force. And so they're like, basically, who are these guys? Where are they coming from? And one such individual who started, was very important and central, his name is El Said Nosser. El Said Nosser was somebody who was from the old Arab fundamentalist clan and has links with the Abu Nidal organization. And the Abu Nidal organization was this offshoot terrorist group that was headed by Abu Nidal, a Arab fundamentalist, but not in a religious sense, political sense, who was basically a gun for hire, even for allegedly Israel as well, even though he conducted terrorists against Israeli elements inside. In one such incident, which is the Rome-Vienna airport attacks that the Abu Nidal organization was behind.
Okay.
So El Said Nosser was a central figure in all this. And later on, he would commit the first terrorist incident in the United States, which a lot of people don't realize or tend to forget. And that was the assassination of Rabbi Meir Kahane, who was the leader of the founder of the Jewish Defense League, the JDL, which is like their own terrorist group for these religious fundamentalists out of Israel. Mm-hmm. Even Israel considers them a dangerous group. So they're bad. And El Said Nosser actually he actually assassinated him and fled from the assassination. And he was caught because he was actually in a gun battle with a postal officer, and he got shot in the process. And he was at the same hospital as Rabbi Meir Kahane. In fact, they were side by side. And Kahane died, but El Said Nosser lived. And later on, they went to trial, and he was found not guilty. But he was found guilty of a gun charge. And so I think he got like 20 years. So while he's in prison, these members of the Al Farouk Mosque, which is basically now, no one knows that these guys exist and they're planning operations. Well, lo and behold, another Egyptian national who basically came to the attention of the FBI, and his name was Imad Salem. Imad Salem was working security in a Russian hotel, and he was becoming a liaison for the FBI about who was coming and going out of these Russian hotels, these Russian dignitaries, and he was helping the FBI because at this time we still had the Cold War going on, and that was our real enemy. Imad Salem told his handler Nancy Floyd about an Egyptian radical that was coming inside the country as well, and he was dangerous. And he was teaching at the Al Farouk Mosque and at a mosque in New Jersey called Masjid al-Salam. And his name was Omar Abdel Rahman. And he was a co-leader and emir of Gamma Islamiyah. And Imad Salem said, have you heard of him? And he said, no, who is he? And when afterwards he told them what he was about, she went back and told her superiors. They said, wow, this guy's in the country? How is he in the country if he's a terrorist and, involved with, the assassination of Sadat? Well, it just so happens why he was in the United States when he shouldn't have been was he was on a terrorist watch list in Egypt, and he went to the U.S. Embassy in Cairo, and filed, used an application and filed for a U.S. visa, and it was approved. Well, it was approved by a CIA case officer acting as a U.S. Embassy consular officer. And not only
that is such a familiar story. There's a book.
Yeah, you would think.
There's a book called Visas for Al Qaeda.
That's right. Written by J. Michael Springman.
Yes, Springman.
That's right.
And he's talking about, is it Jeddah?
Yes.
Yeah.
Yep.
Yeah.
Jeddah consular officer.
We're gonna have to touch on that.
Yes, we're going
not right this moment, but
it will be. It's prominent. It's important.
Absolutely.
But yes, not only once, Tommy, but 4 times.
Whoa.
His visa is approved. Knowing full well, now you can Google blind Sheikh's visa approval, and you'll have articles from the New York Times, Los Angeles Times, where they asked the CIA and said, "How is this possible?" Well, we didn't know he was on a terrorist watch list. I guess.
Yeah.
And it's not like he was
So y'all should be shattered into 1,000 pieces, like JFK said.
Exactly. Well, what good are you?
Yeah.
For God's sakes. And it's not like the first time this has happened.
Right.
Anyway, comes to the country, and he's actually instituted in these mosques, and he starts preaching right away anti-Western vitriol and whatnot to radicalize these members of these people that were in these wars in Afghanistan, are now becoming slowly radicalized. Meanwhile, while they're in the country, the FBI is watching these people, and they're becoming familiarized because of this Imad Salim character. So they gave Imad Salim an operation. Well, look, could you go into this mosque and act, try to get as close to the blind sheikh as possible? And he agreed for a small, he was given a daily, a monthly stipend of, I think it was like $800. It wasn't much. But at the time, $800 was a lot back then. So he got so close to this blind sheikh, he acted as a personal bodyguard. And so while this was happening, he was going back to his handlers saying, hey, listen, they got plans and operations that they want to do something. At the same time, Imad al-Said Nosser, who's in Attica State Prison, called Imad Salim and said, listen, I want to make an operation where to build multiple bombs and bomb the World Trade Center, the Lincoln Tunnel, the Brooklyn Bridge, the George Washington Bridge, Jewish neighborhoods. You know how to make bombs? And he said, sure, I know how to make bombs, right? But he didn't. He didn't know how to make bombs. So he goes back to his handlers, the FBI, and say, hey, listen, these guys want me to make a bomb, and I don't know how to make a bomb, and they're willing to attack U.S. targets. And so Nancy Floyd is like, all right, we got to do something. She goes to her handler, Carson Dunbar. And Dunbar basically says, well, we really can't make him a bomb, but, we really don't like that you're so closely aligned with them. Now, there's a lot of bureaucratic nonsense that goes along with this. And Dunbar basically doesn't like the fact that Nancy Floyd, who's a woman, is basically covering probably the biggest operation that the FBI has right now currently, and doesn't like the fact that, she's probably not sharing all information in which she was. And so Carson Dunbar, in his own right, creates false rumors as well as certain male members of the New York task force about Nancy Floyd having sexual relations with her informant. And this was on the New York Post and the New York Daily News. And I remember these headlines, and they're public. You can Google them. It's, malicious lies. And so to put the pressure on Imad Salim, they say, well, you got to wear what? Imad Salim said, no, if they wear what, I'm dead. They'll know. And my family's in Egypt, and they'll be killed by members of the Gamma Islamiyah or the Egyptian Islamic Jihad, and I can't put them in that, position. So because he wouldn't wear a wire, he says, well, go off the case. And so Imad Salim has to go back and tell the blind sheikh and the members of the Al Farouk Mosque that, hey, listen, I think I'm being tailed by the FBI, so I got to lay low. And they agree to say, all right, go lay low. So he does lay low. And what happens is Now, because they lost their bomb maker, the Al Farouk Mosque puts in a call to Pakistan and says, hey, we need a bomb maker. In comes Ramzi Youssef.
Mm.
Ramzi Youssef, who's now at this time just finishing university in Great Britain, is learning bomb making at a training camp called Wal Jihad in Afghanistan. Along with them, he meets another individual named Ahmed Ajaj. Ahmed Ajaj has some history predicating this. Now, this is important because Ahmed Ajaj was a counterfeiter, had no known ties, wasn't religious fundamentalist, and he had this makeshift money operation in a graveyard in Israel, some like making fake dollars. But the Israeli intelligence service bust the ring, and he's arrested. So he's looking at 3 to 5 years. And so 2 agents basically go to him and say, look, we'll release you, but you have to work for us, and you have to institute yourself into groups like Hezbollah and basically report back to us about what you learned. And so he has to make believe that he's a religious fundamentalist, in which he never was. So he does this, and he, becomes familiar with the Palestinian Islamic Jihad, which is a Sunni extremist group in Palestine, Israel, and also Hezbollah. So he goes to his training camp in Afghanistan, and he has a house now in Houston, and he's a pizza delivery driver, has a job. But he goes to Afghanistan to train in bomb making material. And Thomas Friedman, who writes for the New York Times and I want to say the New Yorker or Vanity Fair, I think it's the New Yorker, did a piece about Ahmed Ajaj, and that he's the only one to report on this, that he did have Israeli intelligence regarding about his background. And one thing about this was that, this may play a part, is that Ahmed Ajaj and Ramzi Youssef traveled to the United States. So they go to JFK Airport, and Ramzi Youssef has this poorly crewed passport and basically was granted asylum, saying that I am an Iraqi escaping the Saddam Hussein regime.
And so
the refugee status.
Right, exactly. And so Ahmed Ajaj is right after him on a separate line. And he brings his belongings with a suitcase. And in the suitcase is this training manuals for bomb making, like all this incriminating stuff. And he has an even cruder passport where the picture falls off. And it's a stolen passport. So he's trying to grant asylum, and he's actually detained by immigration officials there. Now, at the same time, for Ramzi Youssef, just by luck, it just so happens, the jails are full, so they can't really keep him. So they give him a notice of appearance, desk appearance, to show court. He walks out. He goes and gets a cab. He has no money. So he gets a cab, and it just so happens that cab is an Arabic driver. And he basically says, hey, could you basically drive me to this mosque in Brooklyn called Al Farouk? And he does, free of charge, drives him to this mosque. Just so happens he meets the leaders there of the mosque, and he sleeps on this cot in the mosque. And what does he do? He goes and builds this urea nitrate bomb that he gets information from Ahmed Ajaj, who's basically in a detention cell, but Ramzi Youssef keeps in touch with him, calls him periodically and help him building the bomb. While this is happening, people that were involved with building the bomb and helping getting urea nitrate and nitroglycerin in the cylinders involved with this bomb, like people like Mohammed Salameh, Mahmoud Abalima, Nidal Ayad, and another individual, and I always forget his name, and it escapes me.
That's all right. You're pretty on point right now. So
yeah, I feel bad because he's actually a very important figure later, because he actually flees to Iraq and kills me. I can't remember his name, so excuse me. But yeah, they built this bomb in a warehouse in New Jersey, in a building, a very elaborate bomb. It's very huge. It's very big.
Mm.
So they're getting like separate, nitroglycerin, all this stuff, right? And now the FBI is no longer investigating the mosque because the operation is dead. Imad Salem tells his handler, saying, "Look, I warned you that these people are planning something big. Don't call me when the bomb goes off." And that was his direct words to Nancy Floyd and to his handlers, Louis Napoli and John Antisev, who worked for the Joint Terrorism Task Force in New York. Carson Dunbar doesn't care. And so, like, all right, we'll just have to, work other cases. Well, while this is going on, Mohammed Salame actually rents an apartment, is actually living in an apartment in New Jersey. And there's a woman who's renting him this apartment. Her name is Josie Hadass. Now, if that doesn't ring a bell, it's fine. Nobody knows, really, hardly anyone knows who that is. And I'll go back to her later.
Mm.
Upstairs from him is renting an apartment is Ramzi Youssef. And they're living there at the same time. El Sayed Nosair has his own apartment, and in his apartment, when he got arrested, whereas as part of the assassination plot, they found records of all these military documents. And these documents were from Fort Bragg. If that sounds familiar, well, guess what? That came from Ali Muhammad, because Ali Muhammad later on was stealing these documents and placing them somewhere. And it just so happened it belonged in this apartment of El Sayed Nosair. Coincidence? I think not. In these documents, it talks about bomb-making material, handling of weapons, rifles, AK-47s, small arm fires. So in other words, Ali Muhammad, who's this triple agent for CIA, FBI, and Bin Laden and Dr. Ahmad Zawahiri and the Blind Sheikh, all at the same time.
Yeah, were they still called Mujahideen at this point, or had they hadn't come up with Al Qaeda as their title? Were they just kind of like a loose group of thieves that like?
I guess that's a good question, because what would you name them? They're not Al Qaeda, because none of the members of Al Farouk is swearing bayat loyalty, which is a prerequisite for joining Al Qaeda.
Right.
None of these people know Bin Laden. And it's alleged that Bin Laden had never, and this is coming from Bin Laden himself, he personally never met Youssef. He knows of him, but he never met him. So this group, and it's fascinating to me, Tommy, because sometimes, like, even the most veteran counterterrorism scholars basically say this is Al Qaeda, but it's not. One such individual who's a big name in counterterrorism studies is Rohan Guatanara, who's and Steve Emerson, if you ever heard that name before. He did a film called Jihad in America. And he's like one of the most respected voices in Islamic jihad ideology. And basically he called them Al Qaeda, but no, it's not Al Qaeda.
It seems like it's like a prequel, like a prerequisite for Al Qaeda. Like, yeah,
it is. And
they're setting they're laying the foundation that Al Qaeda is built off of, which directly correlates to the Mujahideen. But there's this kind of like it's 10-year gap where they're kind of like this ragtag band of thieves running around trying to figure out how they're going to coordinate and organize.
Right. And I think what we could do is just call them fundamentalists for now. Right. With certain links to the Abu Nidal organization, because we can link Al Sayed Nosair to ANO, but he wasn't a member. But he had links with them. But needless to say, there's almost like this indirect link between a radical fundamentalist group like the ANO with these fundamentalists in '93, and then later after that came Al Qaeda. So even though they didn't work with one another or know one another, they fed off one another.
The reason I wanted to clarify that is because a lot of times you'll hear people say, well, the CIA created the Mujahideen and the Mujahideen became Al Qaeda. and Boko Haram and all these other groups. But it's like there are these gaps. There are things that are happening in between the formation of Al Qaeda and the disintegration of the Mujahideen. And it's like there's not the organizational pool that you would think it like is required to pull these things off. This is kind of like they're kind of like thieves on the road or rebels like out there just trying to make a point, and they happen to all correlate and work in conjunction and lead to the inevitability of 9/11, but it's not actually the same group.
Yeah, I would agree. All right, that's a great description of it. Like, and not to lose the attention of your listener, they all have like one thing in common, and that is to attack U.S. and Israeli interests.
Absolutely.
Even though they never really attack Israeli interests, but they like to declare that they do. It's always U.S. interests.
Well, I think I can kind of see their point. Like on if you're focusing your directives on the U.S. and saying that you're attacking Israeli interests, if you look at how many weapons and how much funding goes to Israel from the U.S., like when they took down the Twin Towers, one of the things I remember hearing was like, yeah, they thought by taking down the Twin Towers they would destroy the money in the U.S.
Right.
Like they were really focused on the financial system of the United States and the way that it benefited Israel. So I think like kind of they're attacking Israel, but kind of the long way around. You know what I'm saying? They're kind of taking this detour and attacking them by proxy. I think it's kind of the way they looked at it.
You wouldn't be wrong there. Like, I guess the United States would be like that extension of Israel because they use the United States in a linear sense regarding military like using them as their military arm. So I guess that would be right. Even attacking the World Trade Center, which is seen as a power of financial institution and wealth, and because bin Laden actually says this, he goes, well, there's a lot of Israeli interests in there. So that would be technically right. Like small, but technically correct.
And the symbolism of those towers falling and what what America transformed into after that symbol was destroyed is pretty incredible as well.
Yeah, there's a massive transformation after.
Right.
Yeah, yes. Exactly.
But go on as you were. I'm sorry. I just felt fine. Like that rabbit trail might be like worthwhile to kind of touch on just a little bit.
Yeah, well, like I said, I do want to try and give. I don't want to like lose the viewer and say, well, what is he talking about there? Try to be a little bit more descriptive. And if I'm like not being descriptive, please stop me and tell me.
Man, I'm reading what you're saying, like the creature from Jekyll Island. I'm like, this would be like the greatest freaking like spy novel ever.
And it would be, but the spy novel is actually reality.
Unfortunately, it's real.
Right, real. So they built the bomb, and meanwhile, the bomb is finished. So Ramzi Youssef allows for a Ryder truck to, because it's huge. These canisters are being built, and they have to be built in a truck. So they put it in a truck, and I want to say there was like 8 canisters of like nitroglycerin, urea nitrate, and I think it weighed close to it was like 100. It was like 10,000 pounds or something like that. It's a big bomb. It was huge, but they go and drive it down to the basement level of the North Tower, and they go to, I think, level B2. That's where they go, and they drive it to south. I want to say southeast near a beam, and they stop, and it's on a fuse, and the fuse is long. It's a huge fuse. So there's another car waiting for them to get out of the garage. So Yusuf lights the fuse. Now they walk back to the car. However, there's a line coming out of the garage, and they are stuck there. The fuse is acting very slow. So, meanwhile, it's alleged. Now, Yusuf actually says this later on to the investigators that everyone's like nervous to car because they think they're going to die right there. Yusuf is in the passenger seat, cool as a cucumber. He doesn't care. He just sits there, like no sweat. And so, like, they're in the car, beeping the horn. They're trying to get out. They drive out. They finally get out. And about 8 minutes later, a massive explosion takes place. I mean, just huge. Knocks out the electricity in the North Tower, and it causes a reverberating explosion shockwave that goes all the way down, even into the lowest, I think, 5 levels below B2, all the way to like B6. Yeah, the shockwave, the explosion went down all the way to B6 level. It caused a huge hole in the World Trade Center, 4 stories down, destroyed, the B2, 3, and 4 levels. What Ramzi Youssef was trying to accomplish here was the following, in the hopes that what he was trying to do in the process was compromise the B levels and have the World Trade Center actually lose its stability and lean into the South Tower and have both towers crash into Lower Manhattan, killing 65,000 people. That was what he wanted.
Yeah.
And so, but the problem was that the World Trade Center, okay.
There you are. Okay.
We're losing stability, huh?
Yeah. Yeah. It keeps telling me that you don't have any connection. It keeps giving me a red signal. That's why I turned my camera off. Thought if I turn my camera off, maybe it'll help. But now it seems to be stable again. So yeah, he was planning on the towers falling into each other.
Yeah, the object was to have both of the towers collapse into Lower Manhattan, killing approximately 65,000 people. That's what he wanted. But the North Tower had held fast.
Yeah.
And survived. And later on in the night, he basically put in a call, and I think it was the New York Times, but don't quote me on that. And he said that this was done by the Palestinians.
Oh, there he is.
Oh, wow. You broke up pretty good.
Yeah.
There you go.
There he is. We're catching up.
CIA. They don't want this.
It could be, man. It could be. I don't know, man. Like, I had this issue the last time I and Eric tried to record, and then it seemed like everything had cleared up over the last couple of weeks, and now suddenly there's an issue, and I'm not sure what that issue is being, and so I'm trying to see. All right, so I can't remember exactly where we were because I've kind of gotten distracted.
Yeah, I know where we were.
Okay, go ahead.
Yeah. So Yusuf flees the country and basically travels to Pakistan. And meanwhile, all the other co-conspirators, they actually leave, except for one person, Mohammed Salame. And he basically goes back to the Ryder truck rental place because he doesn't have money to flee the country, and he needs the security deposit to get on a plane to leave because he's the one who's in charge of renting the Ryder truck that used the bomb for the World Trade Center. Now, investigators miraculously find the axle for the Ryder truck at the bottom of B6. Amazing. They get the VIN numbers and everything. So they do an FBI stakeout, hoping that this guy comes back. And so he comes back for the Ryder truck rental, security deposit. And the guy behind the desk is an FBI agent playing part of an FBI Ryder employee. And so, like, ready to pounce on him. But the guy at the desk is having fun with him and prolonging it, arguing about the price of how much he's supposed to get back. And so they haggle it down to like $130. He gets it. And as soon as he walks out, he's arrested. And are you there?
Yes, I'm here.
Okay, I can barely hear you. But yeah, no, he gets the right. He gets arrested, and basically, he was the first and only person arrested at the time. So they go Josie Hadass, who rents the apartment to him. So they go back. Josie Hadass is not there. They can't get in touch with her. You know, who is this person? In his house, they find wire connectors, bomb-making materials, all like this incriminating evidence in his house, in his closet. And Josie Hadass later on is found out to be a Mossad operative.
Yeah.
How about that?
Who'd have thunk it?
So the FBI, yeah, isn't that something? You know, and because the FBI, because the internet wasn't around back then, very few media outlets reported on this. And you can actually Google the name Josie Hadass, Hadas, and you'll find very few news articles that, you know, talk about her. There's no known picture of her. And the FBI is mum about it. In fact, there's one cop, I think out of New York, that basically said, even if she was an Israeli operative, we still wouldn't tell you, meaning the media. So what does that say? So it's almost like foreign intelligence, domestic intelligence, were keeping their eye on these people that were involved with this terrorist attack. But like, unlike 9/11, where there's a lot of information, there's very few information regarding 93. And it's almost a forgotten subject, which is really a crime in itself, because 93 is a perfect lead up to 9/11. And you could see similarities regarding intelligence monitoring of these operatives, just like what we did with 9/11.
Well, and how much of it sounds just like OKC?
Very much so.
Yeah,
very much so.
It's like,
but Richard, it's amazing to when you really think about it, like, hey, wait a minute, there was a bomb. Like, all right, if you want to compare Oklahoma City bombing, here's a great example, and I'll tell this real quick. The people that were involved with the Oklahoma City bombing was Terry Nichols and Timothy McVeigh, right? That's what we were told. But what they don't tell you is this. Weeks before, they were building these very poorly, crudely made bombs. Like, they didn't know what they were building. But Terry Nichols has a Filipino wife. And it just so happened that they took a trip to the Philippines, Cebu City. And it just so happens that somebody else was in Cebu City at the same time. And it just so happens that they go and meet him. His name was Ramzi Youssef.
Yeah.
Ramzi Youssef is in the Philippines in 1995, and he's training Abu Sayyaf militants on building a bomb. Now, where does this information come from? It comes from an informant of Abu Sayyaf. His name is Edwin Angelines, who's actually the number 2 man in Abu Sayyaf, who helps build the organization, who actually personally goes and kidnaps Christian missionaries, who actually builds bombs to bomb Christian churches. So he's like, is he an intelligence operative, an informant, or a terrorist? Well, he's all three. And so Edwin Angelines is in this meeting with Ramzi Youssef and Terry Nichols. But he doesn't know his name, but he says he's actually shown a picture of Terry Nichols. And he says, "Oh yes, that's the farmer. That's what he's known as." Richard Clark, who's head of the National Counterterrorism Council during the Clinton and Bush administrations, does go with Terry McVeigh, and they go to the Philippines. Weeks later, they bomb the Murrah building. What kind of bomb was used, Tommy? A uranium nitrate bomb.
Yep.
What kind of truck was used with the bombing? Ryder truck. Coincidence?
That's what I'm saying, man. It all sounds so fucking familiar.
No. Man, oh man.
Well, hey, Bub.
But yeah, Richard Booth, who you're familiar with.
Give me 1 second. Let me try something.
Yeah, sure.
I'm gonna
hear you.
Yeah, it keeps scrambling. I'm gonna stop this recording and I'm gonna start a new one and I'm gonna send you a new link. So I'm gonna save this recording as one thing and then I'm gonna send you another one.
Play this game of pick and choose. Well, it's a game that was made for you to lose. It doesn't really matter how many times. It's the same old worn out stories, same old lines. They're all pointing dirty fingers in hypocrisy, bragging on their feats of mediocrity again. Never really making any kind of change, but they keep on getting re-elected, and I find that strange. And that's why I say fuck them, don't feed them, cause we don't even need them. I never celebrate the tyrants that are taking our freedoms. Yeah, I said fuck them, don't feed them, cause we don't even need them. I never celebrate the tyrants that are taking our freedoms. What's it gonna take for you to see that we're living in a rigged democracy? People stand in line for the things that they've been choosing, paying no attention to the rights they keep on losing. But they all gather in the rallies and they chant their names on goddamn well that it's all gonna be the same. Just 4 more years of war and taxes, 4 more years of them grinding down their axes. And that's why I say fuck them, don't feed them, cause we don't even need them. I never celebrate the tyrants that are taking our freedoms. Yeah, fuck them, don't feed them, cause we don't even need them. I never celebrate the tyrants that are taking our freedoms. Cause we don't even need them, we'll never celebrate the tyrants that are taking our freedom. Fuck them, don't feed them, cause we don't even need them, we'll never celebrate the tyrants that